Hello world and welcome to Web Dev Frontiers. My name is Tamas and I'm here to share my experience with you in web technologies. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how my TypeScript setup would look like for a particular project. We're going to be using Vite to set up a blank TypeScript project, and then we're going to modify the tsconfig.json as well as add an ESLint configuration to match what I like to use in my projects. Furthermore, I'm also going to show you a very interesting scenario with TypeScript where we're going to make sure that the IntelliSense inside your editor is 100% aware of the data that you can use when it comes to working with a GraphQL client. If you're ready, let's jump straight in. As a first step, we're going to set up a blank TypeScript project using Vite. And for that, we're just going to use the npm init Vite command. I'm just going to type in dot here because I already have the folder set up, so I don't want Vite to set up a new folder for me. Then I'm going to select vanilla, TypeScript, and now all I need to do is type in npm install to install the dependencies. All right, now if you open up your tsconfig.json file, you have some default options. Now, actually, this is a very good setup. Also note that if you're creating a blank TypeScript project without a Vite, so maybe you use the tsc init command, you will not have some of these defaults, but I like to have my target set to ES 2020 at least, because that will give us some usable modern JavaScript inside the browser. Now again, for those of you new to TypeScript, just to let you know, this compiler option object is basically what's going to drive how your TypeScript is compiled to JavaScript. We cannot run TypeScript natively in the browser, so you need to create some JavaScript based on your TypeScript code, and how that JavaScript gets created is based on the compiler options right here. Also notice that we have strict mode on, but what we don't have here is the no implicit any option. So I like to add that as well. So let's just add no implicit any to be true as well. And the reason why I want to do this is because I do not want to use the any keyword inside my TypeScript projects. And I don't want to use it explicitly, and I don't want to use it implicitly. So I'm going to be forbidding both. But of course, as you can see, I can add no implicit any, but there's no option here that says no explicit any true or false. And so for that, we need to add an ESLint configuration for our TypeScript project, which will then allow us to also forbid the usage of explicit any. Now, if you're wondering why I don't want to see the any keyword inside my project, the answer is really simple. In my view, using the any keyword in TypeScript pretty much means that we would like to switch off the type system in TypeScript. So if you just want to use the any keyword, you might as well just use JavaScript at the first place, because there's not going to be any difference. Well, technically there are some differences because there are some additional keywords in TypeScript that do not exist in JavaScript, but you're essentially getting rid of one of the most interesting and important features of TypeScript, which is its type system. So that's why I'm so adamant on not using any, whether it's implicitly or explicitly. So as I said, let's now create an ESLint configuration as well. And for that, we're going to be using the following command in terminal, npm init @eslint/config. And then this is also going to ask a couple of questions from us. So we would like to check syntax, find problems, and enforce the code style. We are not using any of these right now. So we're not using JavaScript modules nor CommonJS stuff. So we're going to say none of these. We're not using any of these frameworks either, but we do use TypeScript. So I'm going to say yes for this, and we will run the code in the browser. And let's go and use a popular style guide, maybe the standard one. We're going to be changing that a little bit as well. And the configuration file should be, let's go with JSON. Let's use a JSON format. And should we install these dependencies? Yes, and we are going to be using npm. Now, of course, if you want to use yarn or pnpm, then by all means do that, but I'm just going to use npm to install these dependencies for now. Okay, so once the command has finished running, notice that we have an eslint.rc.json file with a couple of options. So first of all, we have the extends property here that says standard with TypeScript, and then we have parser options as well. So first of all, what I'm going to do is replace this extends with an array, and I'm not going to be using standard with TypeScript, but instead I'm going to be using ESLint recommended and another extension. So I've added ESLint recommended, and I added TypeScript ESLint recommended requiring type checking. And for that, I'm also going to set up a rule. So notice we have this rules property where you can sort of fine tune how the linting should happen for your TypeScript files. And I want to make sure that I do not allow explicit any. So we need to enable that rule right here. So I added that, which is TypeScript ESLint, no explicit any. And this line is just going to mean that every time where there is an any inside our project explicitly, then we should be seeing an error. Furthermore, because of the tsconfig.json configuration, if we have an implicit any, then we're also going to be getting an error in our TypeScript files. Okay, so let's save both of these files. Let's close this and let's try to add an actual TypeScript file. Before we do that, I'm going to be doing some cleaning up because the default Vite starter for TypeScript adds a counter and adds some additional styles and a couple of other things to the project. I'm just going to get rid of those, and I'm going to have a single main.ts file left with my own custom styles in the style.css file. So I've done all these updates. So as you can see, main.ts only has an import to the style.css file. Style.css contains my own custom styles. And then the other change that I've done is a change in index.html, where I've added a section with an ID of themes. And this is going to be the placeholder where we're going to be inserting some of the codes that we're going to be writing in TypeScript together. Okay, now let's see what happens if I just write some TypeScript code, and let's say I would like to create a variable called a, for example, give it the any type, and then make that equal to hi. Okay, so we're going to get an error first of all in our editor that says a is declared but its value is never read. So let's just do console.log a so that we read the value. Okay, now notice that this has an any type, which is not something that we wanted, and then let b, and this one also just says that its value is never read. So let's actually do console.log b, and notice we don't get any errors even though both of these are using the any type. So there are a couple of things that we need to do. And depending on your editor setup, you may need to do all of them or you may need to do some of them. Well, there's one thing that you will definitely need to do. You need to go into eslint.rc.json, find the parser options, and just make sure that you specify that the eslint parser should be using the tsconfig.json configuration file when it passes your TypeScript project. Okay, and just hit save, and immediately we see that there is now going to be something underlined in our main.ts file. So we have a message here that says unexpected any, specify different type. So we are not allowing explicit any, but this still doesn't do anything. This b variable still has the type any, which we really don't want to do. Now, again, as I said, depending on your environment, what you need to do is actually maybe restart the TypeScript server and the ESLint server, which you can do by selecting the view menu and then clicking on command palette, and you can restart the ESLint server, and you can also go back there and restart the TypeScript server. And hopefully if you restarted both of these servers, you are now getting 2 errors. And in fact, I just realized that instead of a let, we need to write a const here, because otherwise with a let, things won't work as we suspected. And now there we go, we have the message variable b implicitly has any type, and this any is underlined because this one has the any type explicitly. Great, so now we have very strict type checking on, where we basically disallow the use of the any keyword. Okay, so let's put together a very simple application using TypeScript. And for the purposes of this project, we're going to be working with a data which is going to be football clubs as well as football players. I asked ChatGPT to generate this data, and that's why the data is a little bit old. So I know that Messi doesn't play in Barcelona, and you will find some, old players associated with clubs that they are no longer associated with, but that's fine. So essentially inside this data.ts file, I'm exporting an array of objects where each particular item in this array is a football team with the players listed as well. So I get things like the name of the stadium, the name of the club, of course, country, city, and then the players where we can see their names, their numbers, and their ages. And I think we have about 6 teams. So we have Barcelona, Real Madrid, and a couple of other teams added here as well. Okay, this is just a sample data set that we're going to be using. And so what we're going to do is we would like to take this section ID teams and insert information about the football teams as well as the players. So basically I would like to have a couple of columns inside here where each column is going to be representative of a team, and then I would like to list the players who play for that team. Okay, so we're going to write some very basic TypeScript to achieve this piece of functionality. I'm going to show you the code in two parts. The first part is going to be the part where I import the data from data.ts. I then select the section by the ID called theme, so that's from the HTML. And then I have a function here that is called theme card, which accepts a particular team as well as a list of players. And then what it does, it creates a div where we display the team's name, the city, the country, the stadium, and then we iterate through using the JavaScript map method on the players array. So we iterate through the array and display the name of the player. So that's one part of the code. The second part is to actually use the data and to call this theme card function that we have created. So this is how the code would look like. So I basically create a variable called teams, which is going to be equal to data. And notice that TypeScript is intelligent enough to be able to infer the type for the teams and for the players, right? So if I hover my mouse over that in my editor, I can see how the themes object looks like. So when we iterate through the data sets for each team, I am calling the theme card function where I pass in the team and the players array. And then the rest is just very basic DOM manipulation. I create a new div and I take the card data and I append that to the section. But notice, even though this is valid code, we are now getting some errors because team has an any type as well as players, and both of these have implicitly the any type. And if you notice also for the team name, the city, the country, so all these properties, we're getting the red squiggly lines. That is because the team argument here has an any type, and of course TypeScript cannot be certain that the name property exists on something that has the type any. So what we need to do, we need to tell TypeScript that team is of team type and the players is of player type, and that is going to be an array of players. Because also notice here, we have an unsafe call of any typed value error, because again, players has an any type. So TypeScript says, well, I can't really guarantee that there's going to be a map method available for the players, because what if players is not going to be an actual array? And so we can fix this. And the way to do that is to go ahead and create a file. Let's call that types.ts, for example, and just make sure that it is in the source folder and just add the player type and the team type. And once we have that, we can now go ahead and make sure that the team is going to be of type team, and then the players will be of type player, and just make sure that we say that this is also an array. And instead of import player and team, we can just say import type player and team. That's just more explicit in my opinion. And just by doing that, all our errors are gone. And at this point in time, there's nothing in here that is actually using the any type, which is really, really great. So let's run this application and see what we get in the browser. So I've typed in npm run dev, and now we can go to localhost 5173 to see the application in action. And here it is. We have 3 cards visible: Barcelona, Real Madrid, Manchester United. And if I scroll down, that would be the other 3 football teams with all the players listed. Perfect. So this particular example now works. Now let's complicate things a little bit and let's add some extra complexity to this application. What we're going to do next is introduce a GraphQL endpoint and a GraphQL client. And I'll tell you why we're going to be doing that, because there could be some situations when you run a GraphQL query, you return only a subset of the data back to your application, but TypeScript is not going to be aware of that, and the IntelliSense inside your editor will be able to offer you properties that don't actually exist because your GraphQL does not return that. And we're going to see how to apply a fix for that by using a custom type. Now, since this video is not about GraphQL, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking to you about how GraphQL works and what it does. Maybe I'll record a video about that. If you would like me to do that, by all means, please leave a comment underneath this video. But I'm also going to share the code with you, so you will have access to this. But what I'm using here is just Node.js. I'm using the Express, which is a very popular web framework for a Node.js ecosystem. And there's also a package called Express GraphQL, which allows us to create a GraphQL server on top of Express. And so I've specified a couple of schemas, the type query here. So the query type is actually mandatory. And I'm going to allow this GraphQL server to accept 2 types of queries. One, to list a set of teams, and then one is going to be to display information about a single team where we need to pass the ID. And then I specify how the player and how the team types would look like. And then the rest is just the resolvers. So what happens if someone queries for the teams, and what happens when someone queries for a single team. And a resolver in GraphQL is nothing more than just a simple JavaScript function, which is able to find the data that you're looking for. And then we fire this server up on port 4000. Okay, and then data.js contains exactly the same data that you saw before, but instead of TypeScript, this is now in JavaScript. So I already have this server running on port 4000. So let's see how it looks like by opening up the so-called GraphQL playground, which I have enabled here by saying GraphIQL set to true. Okay, so here's the GraphQL playground. So let's type in teams and let's just try to display the name of all the teams. And we get a data property back. There's a teams property and I get the team names. Awesome. So let's also add maybe the stadium in here. And now we're going to get the name and the stadium. And of course, if we do something like players and then we want to get the name of the players, we can very easily do that as well. So GraphQL allows us to very easily query for data. And of course, I can now do team, a single team with an ID of 1, for example. And this is now only going to return me the Barcelona information, both the team and the player names. Okay, so let's actually implement this inside our TypeScript project. So I've reset everything. I again have pretty much an empty main.ts file. I still have the types.ts file because we'll be using this, and I need to go into index.html, and as opposed to using ID teams, I'm just going to add another section in here which will have the ID team. The reason why I do this is because for this example, I want to query for a single team and I want to display information about that one single team. So let's see how to do that. Well, the first thing that we need to do is create an actual GraphQL client, and that's going to be a TypeScript file, and this file is going to be responsible for actually making the GraphQL query itself. So we're going to specify a GraphQL endpoint, which is localhost 4000/GraphQL, and then we're going to write a function that will actually fetch the data for us. And I'm going to call that function fetch GraphQL, and we will accept an ID, which is going to be the team's ID, which is going to be a number as a parameter to this particular function. And inside this function, I'm going to construct the GraphQL query itself. And this is how it's going to look like. So we're going to create a named query where we're going to pass the ID and then team name, player's name. So I'm only asking for the name of the team as well as the name of the players, nothing else. And as noted here, we're going to be using this query against a single team one at a time. Next up, we're going to use the fetch API to actually go to the GraphQL endpoint using the HTTP method of post. And then we're going to send the query as well as the variables, which is going to be the ID of the particular team that we would like to get information about. Next up, we're going to take the response that comes back from the fetch API, and we're going to be awaiting that so that we can use object destructuring to grab the data as well as the errors. Remember, we got a data property with all the data when the query has finished running successfully. If there's an error in the query, equally, we're going to be getting an error property. And then last but not least, we say if the response was okay, then we're going to grab the team information and just return that. Otherwise, we're going to display an error that says no team found with a particular ID. And if there are any errors, meaning that the response was not okay, we just iterate through those errors and we display the error message. And then of course, we're going to be rejecting the promise and we're going to send the error as the rejection. Okay, so that's it. Let's also make sure that we export default this particular function. And now our GraphQL client is ready to use, except you can see that there are 9+ errors in here. And most of these errors stem from the fact that, for example, data uses the any value, or let's go here, team is also has a value of any. So, okay, let's try to fix these. Now, of course, the one thing that we can do here is specify that, for example, the data or the team is going to be of type team. And the best way to do that is to come up here for the fetch GraphQL function and notice that this at the moment returns a promise of type any. And we really don't want to do that because, as we said, we don't want to have the any keyword appear anywhere. So let's make sure that this actually returns a promise of type team, and just make sure that we import type team here. Now, a couple of errors still exist in here, but that's fine. We're going to come back to that, but let's go to main.ts and how this particular GraphQL client can be implemented now. So first, we're going to import the fetch GraphQL function from that GraphQL client that we have created. And then we're going to call it, and we're also going to select the section that we just added to the index.html file. And then we're going to add this team card function again, but this time around, we don't want to get the players, we just want to get the team. But again, it has an implicit any type. But let's just take a look at what this function does. So it returns a div. We're going to have an h2 with the team name, and let's just also add something like an h3 in here. That is going to be team dot, let's go with country, for example. And I'll tell you why we do this in just a moment. And then we have the roster. So we're going to be iterating through the list of players that would come as a property called players from the team object. Okay, so this is going to be creating the cards, and what we need to do now is of course make sure that we call this function so that the cards actually get added to our HTML. And there you have it. So this will call the team card function and do exactly what we've done before. Just make sure that the div is generated and then it's appended to the section element. Okay, so there are quite a few things that we need to fix. First of all, notice the team has the any type. Okay, so we know that we can say that this is going to be of type team, which will automatically import that. I'm just also going to update this to say import type. Okay, so main.ts looks great, and the only problem we have is still inside the GraphQL client in terms of the TypeScript errors. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to types.ts and I'm going to create a new type specifically to match the response that comes back from the GraphQL server. Or in other words, I want to make sure that I have a type which has a data as well as an appropriate error type, so that we are not getting the any values, but rather we say that the data is going to be team and an error is going to be of an error type. And this is how that type would look like. So I called it GraphQL response, and there's going to be a data property there, which is going to have a team property, which is going to be of the team type. And then for the errors, we're just going to have a message, which is going to be a string, and that can potentially be an array. So if there are multiple errors, then we're going to get an array of errors that we want to return here. And notice I also added question marks for both, because we could either get the data or we could either get the errors. So these are optional. Now, if I go back to the GraphQL client, then I can say that this particular response.json should be casted as, and now I can use this custom type, which is called GraphQL response. And just make sure that it imported correctly, and it's right here. And now all the errors are gone. However, there's going to be something very interesting that you will see when we go to the browser and open up this project. And this is how the project looks like in the browser. And of course, we have the name of the team, we have the players, everything is fine, except for the fact that we get a big undefined here. So how did that happen? Wouldn't TypeScript have something built in that would not allow us to use a particular property that doesn't exist on a type? But if you think about it, and if I go back to my editor right here, so if we go back to main.ts, what we're saying here that the team card accepts a parameter that is of type team. And of course, how does the team type look like? Well, it has an ID, a name, a country, a city, a stadium, and players. So I could, use IntelliSense and access all of these properties. However, the problem is that inside the GraphQL query itself, we are only asking for the name of the team as well as the name of the players, nothing else. And the same is going to be true here. So what if I want to display, say, the age of the player, and then I want to display, say, the stadium of this particular team? I'm not going to get any errors inside my editor, but when I go back to my browser, you can see that the result isn't really not looking great. So the question is, can we do something about it? And of course, as always, the answer is yes. And in fact, what we're going to do is probably one of my favorite features in TypeScript, where we can use a special built-in keyword to actually create a new type based on some existing types. And the keyword that we're going to look at is called the pick keyword. So let's go ahead and create that custom type. I'm going to call it custom theme type, and I'm going to be using the pick keyword here. Now, the pick keyword in TypeScript allows you to pass a type that you would like to use, and the second parameter to the pick is going to be the properties that you would like to pick from the type that you specify here. So what I would like to do is say, well, I want to pick a couple of properties from the theme type. And what I want to do is I want to pick, say, the ID and, for example, the name of the team. Or if I really want to print the stadium, I could say stadium and then name. And apologies, is not a comma, but instead it's a pipe symbol. Okay, so now custom theme type will effectively have the theme, and we would select the stadium and only the name. So now instead of saying that the theme here for the theme card parameter is of type theme, we can say this is now custom theme type. And if I now use my editor and I type in theme dot, the only two properties that I can access are name and stadium. Now, of course, we would have to update this to also include the stadium. So this is something that you would have to do manually, but at least you have the option to take a look at the GraphQL query and basically create a custom type to match whatever data you get back from the GraphQL query itself. Okay, so now if we do stadium, that's going to work. So right now, the only problem that we have is with the theme players. Because if you think about it, the custom theme type only contains two properties, stadium and name, with its type definitions, but nothing else. There's nothing in here that says there is a player's property available, which we can use. Luckily, we can extend this custom theme type by typing in the ampersand character. So this is essentially extending an existing type. And we're going to say that the custom theme type should have a player's property as well, which is going to be of player type. But do we really want to have the player type in here? Well, maybe we should use the pick keyword again, make sure that we use the player type, and that we pick the name of the player. And of course, players, and this is very important, will be an array since we're using the map keyword. And so now if we come here and type in player, the only property that we can access is the one that we have picked from the original player type, which is going to be name. And so now if we go back to the browser, all the information appears correctly. In fact, I probably messed this up. So let's go back here, and yeah, the team name should be team.name. And then we have the stadium underneath that. And there we go. We've updated the code, and now we get that change reflected in the browser. So to sum it up, using this approach, now you can create a custom theme type. You can use the pick keyword to pick the properties that you're interested in based on the incoming GraphQL query, so that now everything is in line and is in sync. So your editor's IntelliSense is aware of the properties that it can offer up for you, so you no longer will receive those pesky undefined errors inside your code. And there you have it. This is how I like to set up my TypeScript projects in terms of the tsconfig.json file, so making sure there's no any used in the project. Plus, I also add some ESLint settings, making sure that the any keyword is pretty much eliminated from my TypeScript project. And the other thing that I showed you in this video was the usage of the pick keyword in a use case where you may be using GraphQL queries inside your web applications. If you have similar use cases, or if you like to use a pick keyword as well, or maybe you're a fan of the omit keyword, please let me know in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video and it helped you and you learned something, then please give it a like. Also do subscribe for more such content, and thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.